Hello, I'm David Panush of the Edmund Burke School, just in case anybody outside of our group ends up watching this video. This video is not meant to be an authoritative dissertation on the topics of innovation and education. It's just really to help introduce you to some of the major ideas, things that I know, because I don't know everything, and if we all can share a bit of a framework, even if it's not one we all agree on, or you have some other ideas, of course, it gives us something of a starting point. So hopefully you'll be able to get something out of this and help spur our conversations. Um, I would liken this video to the rough draft of a research paper. I don't think I have all my ideas organized in a very persuasive, logical, thesis-driven fashion at this point. But I am going to try and organize them in some fashion so that it's helpful to you. Please give me your feedback, and if I do this again, I'm sure it will be better because of that. So the starting point that I'm going to use is why do we have school? So there are three reasons that people generally talk about, I think, more or less important to Burke. The first is we need school to create a functioning democracy. We need people who can be citizens and contribute to our democracy. They need to be informed. They need to be able to tell truth from fiction and understand the processes that they're involved in. The second reason we have schools is to create workers in our market-based economy so that our material way of living can continue and people can live in comfort and have their needs met. The third reason why we might have school is to produce good people, to produce people who are fulfilled, who are happy, who live satisfied, meaningful lives. I think there are some more mundane ways of thinking about why we have school as well. And certainly, in terms of Burke, our job, or the reason why we have a school, some people might say, is to prepare students for college. It's in the title of our school. Another very real reason why schools exist is to keep kids off the streets during the day, keep them safe, so that the parents can go out and work. And thirdly, the reason why we continue to have school for some of us who work at schools, again, this might be a little cynical, but it's to keep us in our jobs. And there are just sometimes decisions that get made in schools that are, I think, driven by the interests of the people who run them as opposed to necessarily the people who attend them. So if we take that as our starting point, why do we have school? We might ask, are we doing a good job of meeting the needs that school was created for? And I think that leads us to this question of innovative teaching and learning, because there are a lot of folks who are looking around and saying, we are not doing a good enough job of preparing students for the world in which they will live, either as workers or citizens or as just happy people. Therefore, we must think about innovating teaching and learning. And innovating maybe is sometimes a fancy word for changing or reforming or creating new ways of thinking about school. So there are a couple different reasons that folks like this look at schools and they say, why do we need to innovate? The first one that comes up sometimes is this idea, as all good acronyms do. This acronym came from the military. It was used to describe the situations in Afghanistan and Iraq, and it's a VUCA world. And what it means is volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. Sorry, as I consult my notes. So if that's the type of world we live in, we have to ask, are our schools preparing students to live in that world, to work in that world, to study in that world, to be citizens in that world? One could certainly argue, as again I said, I'm not the authoritative expert, that we've always lived in a world that was volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, and there's nothing new about this. Even so, if that's the world we live in, let's ask the question, are our schools doing a good job of preparing students for it? The next argument you sometimes hear as to why we need to innovate schools is this idea of what we'll call the A's, and Dan Pink talked about this in his book, A Whole New Mind. So abundance, right? We live in a time of unprecedented material abundance, and most people, that's wrong, but many people, many more people than ever in history, don't have to spend their entire days just trying to grow food or support themselves to live at a subsistence level. Even very, very poor people, by our standards, have access to amazing technology and amazing materials that they didn't just a few years ago. And our schools, to some degree, we know are based on our schedule is based on an agrarian economy, which we don't have anymore. Abundance leads to this next one, which is accessibility. I mean that in two ways. The first is because of abundance, more people than ever have access to the internet. More people than ever have access to education, et cetera, et cetera. The internet itself has obviously revolutionized the idea of access to information and knowledge. It is not something that only some people have access to, and not just people in first world countries. Anybody who has a cell phone anywhere in the world can tap, and then they get access to all the answers, almost the entire collected wisdom, right, of the human race. So I think the folks who think about this think, schools that focus on creating knowledge are that should no longer be the focus, because knowledge is accessible. Content and facts and figures are accessible. So what does that mean if it's so accessible? Maybe it should force us to think differently about what our focus is. Expertise might still be necessary, but in what ways, and how should we practice thinking about expertise and knowledge? So automation, the last of the A's, automation, also artificial intelligence. This is a simple idea that the jobs that we think humans will be doing, they won't be doing. And we've already seen this trend for a long time, and it's disruptive. So robots can build things that humans used to build. Artificial intelligence is already doing things that we used to think were only jobs that people could do. And so I guess I would add to the fact that on this point, some people might think innovation means that we need to teach engineering or STEM, or we need to teach computer science. I'll point out something quite obvious, which is those jobs can be shipped overseas just as easily as manufacturing jobs. There are 100 million people in the Philippines that speak English, and even about that many in India. China, Russia, these places can turn out engineers and computer programmers at massive numbers that will work for much less than engineers, computer programmers in our country. Not to mention, there's already artificial intelligence that can write computer code. So again, the content is not the solution. Okay, we need to be thinking about what can we do and to prepare students for a world in which a lot of what we think people are good at, or good at doing, or useful for, they're not actually necessary for. So the other reason why I think some people think we need to be thinking about innovation in education is because there's been a lot of research in the last 20, 30 years on how the brain learns, on how people are motivated, and how people are productive and find meaning in the work that they're doing. And currently, schools are not really responsive to that research. And I think some people might say, I might say, that at the very best, that's irresponsible. And at the very least, it's a missed opportunity. If you have research that tells you about how the brain works when you're trying to get it to learn things, you know how to motivate people in general, and you know how to help them be more productive and efficient, and you don't use it, that seems a loss. So the second video is going to be more about some of this research. The last reason why at Burke, at least, we might want to start thinking about this is because the competition already is. And the competition does not just mean other independent schools. Okay, technology is out there that's going to disrupt the entire educational model. It already is. Online schools or online teaching is getting better and better. And again, some of it is becoming automated. They have adaptive learning software that's essentially an artificial intelligence. If you're talking about a topic in which largely you just need to learn something and memorize it and get good at memorizing it, not to be certain topics might lend themselves to this more, but essentially an adaptive learning software could be just as good and maybe even faster than a classroom teacher. So we have to, or some people may think that, and so we're going to have to think, how do we compete with that? Just in DC, if we think Burke is a great place because we're small, there's a school on Tilden Street that is a one-on-one school. Okay, if we think Burke is a great place because we have a leadership development program, we need to face the fact that there's already a Washington Leadership Academy charter school that focuses its entire school on leadership. We think Burke is great because we have some really cool experiential learning programs. Well, there's a school that just opened up downtown near Capitol Hill that bases its entire curriculum on experiential learning. So one of the reasons we need to be thinking about this is because other people already are, and there's going to be forces acting upon this industry and upon this school that are going to erode what it means to go to school and why kids and families might send their kids to our school. So you might then ask, given all of these factors, what do we do, or what are the right responses? What's the right solution? The idea at this point is not for me to give you any ideas. I have tons. I really want to get you thinking. I want you to start thinking, what would you do, or what of the ideas that I've talked about would you argue with, or would you respond to, resonates with you? And if there's more research that you want to do before Friday, there's a lot out there, and you can educate yourself on one of these topics if you think it's been useful or helpful. That is the end of part 1. I hope you get a chance to look at it before we meet. I'll see you soon.